Have you ever seen someone at their absolute lowest and felt something inside you say, "Don't walk away"? This story begins on a rainy afternoon where a struggling single dad pulls over to help a pregnant bride sitting alone at a bus stop, still in her wedding dress, soaked to the bone, and abandoned by the man who was supposed to love her. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But the kindness he showed that day would change 3 lives forever, including his son's. What starts as an act of compassion slowly unfolds into a deeply moving journey of healing, unexpected love, and the quiet beauty of second chances. So settle in. Let this story wrap around you like a warm blanket on a cold day. And if you believe in the power of love, redemption, and the quiet strength of kindness, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. A struggling single dad took in a pregnant bride. Left at the altar, she changed his son's life. The rain came down in sheets that afternoon, turning the gravel roads of Pleasant Hills into slow-moving streams. The kind of rain that blurred the edges of everything, the sky from the trees from the ground, the present from the past. Ben Callahan drove carefully along the winding country road, wipers working overtime, his old pickup truck rattling like it always did when the weather turned. He'd just finished patching a leaking roof over at the Kendall's farm. It had taken longer than expected, and he was soaked to the bone, the wool collar of his flannel shirt plastered to his neck. But he wasn't in a rush. Not really. There was nothing waiting for him at home but a reheated casserole, a stack of unpaid bills, and a 10-year-old boy who had stopped smiling 2 years ago. As he rounded the bend near the edge of town, something caught his eye. There, sitting alone on the splintered bench of the abandoned bus stop, was a woman in a wedding dress. Her white gown clung to her knees, soaked and heavy. A veil, lopsided and tangled, hung from her hair, now limp with rain. She was barefoot and pregnant. Ben slowed to a crawl, squinting through the windshield. This had to be some kind of mistake. A prank, maybe. But as he pulled up beside her, she didn't move, didn't even look his way. She just sat there with her hands cupped over her swollen belly, her chin trembling, staring down at the mud pooling around her feet. He rolled down his window, voice tentative. "Ma'am, you okay?" She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were red, mascara streaked like war paint across her cheeks. Her lips parted, but no sound came out, just the soft clatter of rain between them. Ben hesitated. Logic told him to keep driving. This wasn't his business. But something, maybe the way her fingers clutched the fabric of her dress, maybe the hollow look in her eyes, made him put the truck in park. He stepped out, boots squelching in the wet gravel, and shrugged off his jacket. "Here," he said, crouching beside her. "You shouldn't be out in this." She flinched at first, then looked at the jacket like she didn't know what to do with it. Eventually she took it, draping it around her shoulders with trembling hands. The rain seemed to grow gentler for a moment. "You want me to call someone?" he asked. "No." Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "There's no one." Ben nodded slowly. He glanced at her belly, then back to her face. "Did something happen?" Her jaw clenched. She wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I got left, at the altar." A bitter laugh escaped her lips, short and sharp. "Guess I should have seen it coming." Ben stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. Then quietly he said, "You can't stay out here. Come on, my place isn't far." She looked up at him, eyes narrowing. "Why would you help me?" "Because I wouldn't want my son sitting here like this, and no one stopping." Her face softened. Not a smile, not yet. But something unspoken passed between them. Trust, or maybe just exhaustion. Ben offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. The ride was quiet. She held his jacket close, staring out the fogged window as the truck bumped along the country road. The heater blew lukewarm air, fogging up the windshield again, but neither of them seemed to mind. "I'm Ben," he said after a while, stealing a glance her way. "Ben Callahan." She didn't look at him. "April," she murmured. "April Monroe." "Nice to meet you, April." She gave a short, hollow laugh. "You have a strange definition of nice." Ben didn't push her. He'd learned that some silences deserved to stretch out. His house sat at the edge of the woods, modest and weathered with age. The porch creaked as he helped her up the steps, and the warm glow from the kitchen window spilled just enough light to make the place look like home. Inside, the house smelled faintly of sawdust and pine cleaner. Lucas was curled on the couch with a book, his dark hair falling over his brow. He looked up, blinking in confusion at the soaked woman standing beside his father. "Who's that?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "A guest," Ben said simply, setting a dry towel on the table. "She's gonna stay with us for a bit." Lucas said nothing, just stared, suspicious. April didn't speak either. She wrapped the towel around her hair and moved to stand near the fire. Ben grabbed another towel, handed it to her. "There's a spare room. Not fancy, but it's clean. You should rest." April nodded but didn't move. She looked down at her belly, then back at Ben. "Thank you," she said. I didn't know where to go." Ben just nodded. "You don't have to explain." He walked toward the hallway, then paused. "I've got some soup, if you're hungry. I haven't eaten since breakfast." "Then that's the first thing we'll fix." As Ben turned to the stove, April lowered herself into the rocking chair by the fire. Lucas hadn't taken his eyes off her, and for a moment, just a flicker, April's hand reached for the curve of her belly, as if shielding the child inside from something unseen. Outside, the storm began to fade. The rain softened into a whisper, and in that quiet, something unspoken settled between the three of them. Not quite a beginning, not quite a family, but maybe something close. The wind had calmed by the time April awoke the next morning, but the gray sky still hung low like a damp blanket over the hills. Rain tapped gently against the bedroom window, as if reluctant to leave completely. She lay still for a moment, cocooned in warm flannel sheets that smelled faintly of cedar wood and something else, something clean and simple. She blinked up at the ceiling, wooden beams running across it like the ribs of an old ship. For a long second, she forgot where she was. Then it came back, sharp as a pinprick. The church, the empty aisle, the silence after the music stopped, the pitying looks, the gasps, her own heartbeat pounding like a drum. And then, nothing but road, rain, and a stranger's truck. She rolled to her side and pressed a hand against her belly. The baby shifted gently in response, like a whisper from within. "We're okay," she whispered. "I think we're okay." A soft knock on the door startled her. "Morning," Ben's voice came through, calm and unhurried. "Didn't mean to wake you. Just wanted to let you know there's coffee and I made toast. No pressure." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat up slowly, smoothed the wrinkles from the oversized t-shirt he'd left out for her to sleep in. Her wedding dress was hanging on the back of the door, still damp at the hem. The absurdity of it made her eyes sting again. What kind of life was this? But she inhaled slowly, deeply, grounding herself, one step at a time. The kitchen was modest, all wood and stone and hand-built charm. A pot of coffee sat on the stove, a plate of toast beside it. Through the window, April could see the trees swaying gently in the breeze, tall evergreens surrounding the house like quiet sentinels. Ben was sitting at the table with a pencil in one hand and a notepad in the other, looking over what seemed to be a list of repair jobs. He looked up when she entered and stood immediately. "Hey, you slept okay?" She nodded, a little unsure of how to behave. "Better than I thought I would." "Good." He gestured toward the plate. "Help yourself. I wasn't sure what you might be craving." April gave a small smile and sat down across from him. She reached for the toast, then hesitated. "I'll pay you back. For everything. As soon as I can." Ben shook his head. "I didn't help you to get paid." "That's not the point," she said softly, looking down. "I don't like feeling helpless." "Senna." He studied her for a beat before replying. "You're not helpless. You're just hurting." That caught her off guard. No one had said it like that. Everyone else had told her to be strong, to hold her head high. But Ben's words gave her permission to just be. Lucas patted in a few minutes later, still in his pajamas, hair a wild mess. He paused when he saw April, then silently moved to the fridge and grabbed a juice box. "Morning," she offered gently. He gave her a half glance, then looked at Ben. "Is she staying?" "For a while," Ben said. "She needs a place to rest." Lucas didn't reply. He took his juice and disappeared into the living room without another word. "I'm sorry," April said quietly. "I didn't mean to intrude on your lives." "You didn't," Ben replied. Lucas, he's been through a lot. He'll warm up. It just takes time. What happened? Ben hesitated, then answered simply. His mom passed away. Cancer. 3 years ago. April nodded slowly. I'm sorry. He offered a quiet shrug. Thanks. They sat in silence for a while. The coffee was warm. The toast was slightly overcooked but comforting. Outside, the clouds began to thin, and a faint golden light peeked through the trees. Later that morning, April stood on the back porch, looking out at the forest behind the house. The rain had washed the world clean, and the scent of pine and wet earth filled the air. She felt Ben approach before he spoke. If you want to walk, there's a path through the woods, just down past the shed. It's not long, but it's peaceful. I'd like that, she said. They walked together, slowly because of her belly, down a trail carpeted with fallen pine needles. Birds chirped in the high branches and the world seemed to breathe again after the storm. I used to walk this with Lucas, Ben said, back when he still talked to me. April looked at him sideways. He doesn't? Not like he used to. He shut down after Marianne died. I tried therapy, books, talking. Nothing really stuck. He paused, then added, he's a good kid, just hurting. She nodded. I know that feeling. Ben glanced at her belly. Do you know if it's a boy or girl? Girl, she said, smiling for the first time. Doctor says she's healthy. Strong heartbeat. You have a name picked out? Not yet, she said, placing her hand on her stomach. I thought I had time to figure it out with someone else. He didn't press. When they returned to the house, Lucas was sitting on the porch steps, hugging his knees. He didn't look up as they approached. April didn't say anything. She simply sat a few feet away, giving him space. After a long moment, she began to hum softly. Just a tune, familiar and gentle, one she used to play for her kindergarten students during nap time. Lucas glanced at her, just briefly, but he didn't get up. He didn't walk away. And April, still humming, smiled at the first thread of connection beginning to form. Not forced, not expected. Just there. The afternoon sun peeked through the clouds for the first time in days, casting soft golden light over the yard behind Ben's house. The trees sparkled faintly with leftover rain, and puddles shimmered like tiny mirrors in the dirt driveway. It was the kind of quiet that felt sacred, like the world was holding its breath. Inside, the house was still. April stood at the edge of the living room, holding a folded towel in one hand, eyes fixed on the object that sat in the far corner, half hidden beneath an old quilt. A piano. It was upright, worn smooth at the edges. The wood was dark and dusty, the top lined with forgotten family photos and a small vase holding dried flowers. There was something almost reverent about the way it stood there, untouched, as if waiting. April set the towel down and approached it slowly. She didn't need to lift the cover to know what it would feel like beneath her fingers. Music had been her first language. Before heartbreak, before fear. She used to believe that certain songs could mend things, stitch together the broken seams of a soul, but she hadn't played in months. Not since the man she was supposed to marry told her that her music was a cute hobby and she should focus on being a proper wife. Still, her fingers itched with memory. She hesitated. Then gently she lifted the cover. Dust stirred in the air. She pressed a single key, middle C. It rang out, soft but clear, vibrating in the quiet. Another key, then a chord. Her hand found the progression without thinking. It was an old lullaby, one her mother used to hum when the world felt too loud. From the hallway, Lucas froze. He hadn't heard that sound in years, not since the days when his mother was still alive, when the house still carried echoes of warmth and laughter. The last time someone played that piano, he'd been too young to know the notes, but he remembered how the music made the light seem softer, the nights less scary. Drawn by curiosity he wouldn't admit to, Lucas edged closer. He stopped just short of the doorway and peeked in. April sat at the bench, her back straight, her fingers moving gently. Her belly curved beneath the soft fabric of her sweater, rising with each breath. She didn't look around. She didn't perform. She just played, like she needed to. Lucas watched, silent, his expression unreadable. Ben walked in from the shed, wiping his hands with an old rag. He paused when he saw April at the piano and Lucas in the hall. He said nothing. That evening after dinner, the tension around the table had eased slightly. April had offered to cook, and while the chili was too spicy for Ben's taste, he ate it anyway. Lucas picked at his cornbread in silence, but at least he didn't leave the table. "Do you play every day?" the boy asked suddenly, his voice almost startling in the quiet. April blinked. "I used to. I haven't in a while." Lucas looked down. "Why?" April considered her answer carefully. "Because someone once made me feel like it didn't matter. Like my music wasn't important." Lucas didn't respond right away. Then softly he said, "It mattered to me." Ben looked at his son, startled. Lucas hadn't spoken like that in months. April smiled gently. "Thank you. That means a lot." Lucas glanced away, cheeks pink. "Will you teach me?" Ben raised his brows, almost dropping his spoon. April placed her hand on the table, steady and calm. "I'd love to." Over the next few days, a quiet rhythm began to form. In the mornings, April helped tidy the house and prep dinner with Ben, their conversations light and companionable. In the afternoon, she sat with Lucas at the piano, guiding his hands with gentle patience, praising his efforts with warm encouragement. Lucas took to it faster than anyone expected. He was focused, attentive, and, perhaps most important of all, eager. Ben watched from a distance, often pausing in the doorway with a tool belt slung over one shoulder. He saw something shift in his son's face, a softening, a glimmer of joy that had long since faded. And in April's presence, there was no pressure, no expectation, just quiet understanding. One afternoon, as the sunlight spilled through the lace curtains and dust motes danced in the air, April and Lucas played together, a halting, two-hand version of "You Are My Sunshine." The notes were a little wobbly, the rhythm uneven, but it was beautiful. When they finished, Lucas looked up at her, grinning wide. "Can we try it again?" April laughed softly. "Of course." Ben swallowed hard. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard his son laugh like that. That night, after Lucas had gone to bed, April stepped out onto the porch. The night air was crisp, tinged with pine and smoke from a distant chimney. Stars blinked overhead, shy and scattered. She wrapped Ben's old flannel around her shoulders and sat on the swing. Ben joined her a few minutes later, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Chamomile," he said, offering one. "You're full of surprises," she replied, taking it with a smile. They sipped in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. Crickets, the creak of wood, the occasional hoot of an owl. "He's opening up," Ben said quietly. "I don't know how you did it, but thank you." April stared at her tea. "I didn't do anything special. I just didn't try to fix him." Ben nodded slowly. "Sometimes that's all we need." She looked at him, the porch light casting a soft glow across his face, worn and kind, with a quiet strength that didn't ask for recognition. "I used to think I knew where my life was going," she said. "The wedding, the baby, the house in the suburbs. But now, I have no idea what's next." Ben leaned back, eyes on the stars. "Sometimes not knowing is the best part." April let out a soft breath. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of the quiet. And somewhere inside the house, a piano waited, not just for her anymore, but for something new, something real. The first frost of the season crept across the fields like a whispered warning. Blades of grass wore a silvery sheen, and the branches of the pines surrounding the Callahan house stood still, heavy with the hush of morning. Inside the kitchen, April moved carefully between the stove and counter, her growing belly shifting the balance of her steps. She wore one of Ben's old flannel shirts over a cotton dress, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, a wooden spoon in hand. The smell of cinnamon and warm oats filled the space. Lucas sat at the table, hunched over his cereal, scribbling something in a notebook. His tongue peeked slightly from the corner of his mouth, a habit April had noticed when he was concentrating. He hadn't said much since waking up, but she'd learned not to push. Instead, she watched him from the corner of her eye as she stirred. "Is that a drawing?" she asked softly, not wanting to intrude. Lucas shrugged. "Sort of. Siri, can I see?" He hesitated. Then, without looking up, he slid the page toward her. April wiped her hands on a dish towel and leaned in. The sketch was rough but heartfelt, an outline of a piano, with a pair of small hands hovering above the keys. Above it, written in blocky pencil letters, were the words, "When the music starts, I feel okay." April blinked, caught off guard by the tenderness of it. "Lucas, this is beautiful." He looked up then, just briefly, and in that moment, April saw it, a flicker, a crack in the armor, something soft, unguarded. "Thanks," he murmured, tugging the page back and folding it in half. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. Later that day, as the sun climbed higher and melted the frost into dewy puddles, Ben returned from town with lumber and a small bundle of groceries. April met him at the porch, her hair pulled into a messy braid and her face flushed from kitchen heat. "Is that real butter?" she asked with exaggerated delight, peeking into one of the bags. Ben grinned. "Figured you deserved the good stuff after 3 days of feeding us like royalty." "I'll bake something," she promised, lifting a bag and waddling inside. Ben followed, watching the sway of her shoulders, the easy rhythm she'd brought into the house. It wasn't just that she was helpful. It was the way she existed without making demands. The way she spoke to Lucas with patience, with respect. The way she moved through grief without bitterness. It unnerved him sometimes, how naturally she fit. That afternoon, Ben worked on the porch steps, sanding the worn planks down for a fresh coat of sealant. Lucas sat nearby on the porch swing, legs dangling, sketch pad in his lap. April was inside, playing gentle scales on the piano. "Dad?" Lucas asked suddenly. Ben paused, looking up. "Yeah, buddy?" Lucas kept his eyes on the page. "Do you think it's okay to like her?" Ben set the sander down slowly. His heart caught in his throat, not from the question itself, but from the weight behind it. "I think," he said carefully, "that it's more than okay. I think it's good. She's kind, and kind people are worth keeping around." Lucas nodded, still not looking up. "She makes the house feel less quiet." Ben swallowed hard. "Yeah, I've noticed that too." Lucas was quiet a long moment. Then, "Do you miss Mom every day?" Ben sat beside him, the wood warm beneath them. "I do. I always will. But you're not sad all the time." "No, not anymore." Lucas finally looked up. "Do you think Mom would have liked April?" Ben's eyes stung unexpectedly. He smiled, slow and honest. "Yeah, kiddo. I think she would have loved her." That evening, the house glowed with the scent of baked apples and vanilla. April sat on the floor with her back resting against the couch. Lucas curled beside her with a blanket over his knees. They were watching a nature documentary about owls, though Lucas had lost interest halfway through and now leaned into her, eyes drooping. Ben watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, something warm settling behind his ribs. April looked up and met his eyes. "You've got a good kid," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly. "He's been through too much for someone so young." April stroked a hand gently over Lucas's hair. "He's finding his way back." Ben nodded. "You're helping him do that." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Sometimes, when you're broken, the only thing that helps is someone who doesn't ask you to be okay." Ben stepped into the room, lowering himself to the floor beside them. He looked at Lucas, fast asleep now, one hand still clinging to April's cardigan. "He used to laugh all the time," Ben murmured. "Silly, loud belly laughs. Then one day they just stopped." April nodded. "Maybe they're not gone. Just hiding. Waiting." Ben smiled faintly. "You talk like you've seen a lot." "I've heard a lot of silence," she said. "And when you listen closely to silence, it teaches you things." They sat together for a while, wrapped in the hush of the room and the soft flicker of firelight. April's hand rested on her belly. Ben's shoulder brushed hers, and between them, Lucas slept soundly for the first time in what felt like years. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Ben stood alone on the porch. The moonlight bathed the yard in silver. He exhaled slowly, letting the crisp air fill his lungs. He didn't know what this was becoming, this strange, quiet bond forming between three people who had every reason to stay guarded. But it was something real, and for now that was enough. The trees behind the Callahan house had begun their slow transformation, dressing in early October's muted palette. Burnt golds, soft ambers, a few stubborn greens hanging on, like summer's last breath. Morning light filtered through the branches in dappled patches, illuminating the porch where April sat with a cup of tea nestled in her hands. She'd taken to starting her mornings there, wrapped in a blanket Ben kept folded over the back of the rocking chair. The scent of pine and wood smoke hung in the crisp air, and the distant sound of birdsong drifted down from the hills. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt her breath moving slower, more evenly. Inside, Lucas practiced scales on the piano. His fingers were still uncertain, but the rhythm was steadier, his confidence growing with every note. April smiled faintly at the sound. She knew that kind of healing didn't come quickly. It came in pieces, small, soft ones that glued themselves back together when no one was looking. The screen door creaked behind her. She turned as Ben stepped out, his flannel sleeves rolled to the elbows and a thermos in hand. "Coffee?" he offered. "Always," she said, holding out her mug with a quiet grin. He poured some in, then leaned against the porch post beside her. For a long moment, they just sipped in silence. "I think he's starting to like it," April said finally, nodding toward the piano. Ben chuckled. "He hums to himself now. Doesn't think I hear it, but I do. Every time he's drawing or walking around outside, little melodies under his breath." "You gave him space," she said softly. "That's more than most would know how to do." Ben looked out over the yard, where the morning sun glistened on dew-soaked leaves. "I didn't always. After Marianne died, I tried to fill the silence. Talking too much, asking too many questions. I thought if I stayed cheerful enough, maybe he wouldn't fall into that same darkness I felt. But it didn't work." April studied him for a beat. Sometimes silence is safer than pretending. He met her eyes then, and something in his gaze softened. "You seem to know a lot about silence." April looked away, the rim of her mug trembling just slightly in her fingers. "I spent the last 2 years being with someone who didn't really see me. Not in the way that mattered. I thought I was building a life, but I was just shrinking to fit inside his version of it." Ben said nothing, but the way he listened, that still, grounded way, made her feel more heard than any words ever could. Later that day, the three of them ventured into town. April needed a few things: a coat that actually closed over her belly, new shoes that weren't wedding heels, and Ben had promised Lucas a stop at the hardware store to pick out wood for a school project. Pleasant Hills wasn't big, just a main street lined with brick buildings, a few antique shops, the old diner with the squeaky screen door, and a grocery store with a single cashier who seemed to know everyone's business before they even stepped inside. Still, walking down that sidewalk beside Ben and Lucas, April felt oddly exposed. People stared. Some offered polite smiles. Others, less so. At the corner, they passed a woman in her 50s who looked April up and down before muttering under her breath, "Shame, that dress." Ben heard it too. He paused, turning slightly toward April. "You okay?" She nodded, jaw tight. "Small towns talk. I knew that going in." "People don't know what they're talking about," he said flatly. "I'm used to whispers." Ben looked at her then, really looked at her. "You shouldn't have to be." "Oh." She didn't reply, but her fingers brushed his coat sleeve just briefly. It wasn't quite a thank you. It was more like acknowledgement. That small thread of understanding only two people on the other side of pain could share. Later that evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep, curled on the couch with a book open on his chest, April helped Ben clean the kitchen. He washed. She dried. Their rhythm was unspoken, easy. "This might sound strange," she said, placing a dry bowl on the shelf, "but your house feels like it breathes." Ben looked over, puzzled. "I mean," she continued, "it has its creaks and sighs, but it's alive. Like it holds memories but makes room for new ones." He leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "It used to feel like a museum, like I was just keeping things frozen the way Marianne left them. I was afraid if I changed anything, Lucas would think I was letting go of her." April's voice was soft. "Letting go isn't forgetting. It's making room." Ben was quiet a long time. "I didn't expect you," he admitted. "Any of this." She smiled, a little sad, a little warm. "Neither did I." He reached up then and took a plate from her hands. His fingers brushed hers. Just the lightest touch, but it lingered. She didn't pull away. I've been thinking, he said, clearing his throat. You should teach music again, if you want. I know the community center's always looking for volunteers. I could help set it up. April's breath caught. No one had asked her to step forward in a long time, only to shrink, only to stay. I'd like that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben nodded. Then let's make it happen. That night, April stood at the window of her room, looking out into the quiet. The stars were hidden behind a veil of clouds, but she felt their presence somehow. Just like she felt the baby turning gently inside her, as if even she knew. This place, this season, this moment, was becoming something more than temporary. It wasn't love yet, not quite, but it was trust, and that was a start. The wind changed that week. It swept down from the hills carrying the scent of cold earth and the first hints of wood smoke from chimneys across Pleasant Hills. The leaves turned quicker now, painting the landscape in strokes of copper and russet. The kind of season that seemed beautiful only because you knew it wouldn't last. April stood on the back porch in one of Ben's old sweaters, watching the wind rustle through the trees. Her hands rested on her belly, which had grown heavier, rounder. The baby moved more now, tiny, fluttering shifts that felt like soft reminders. I'm here. I'm real. I'm yours. She didn't notice Ben until she heard the screen door creak open behind her. You okay? He asked. April nodded but didn't look at him. Just thinking, she said, about how fast everything can change. Ben leaned beside her on the railing, elbows resting on worn wood. Sometimes change sneaks up. Sometimes it crashes in. She gave a short laugh, low and tired. Mine did both. He didn't press her to explain. That was one of the things she liked about Ben. His silences weren't demanding. They just made space. The call came that afternoon. April was folding laundry when her phone, buried deep in the coat she rarely used, buzzed loudly across the floorboards. She froze. Very few people had her number now. She hadn't spoken to her mother since before the wedding. And even then, it was mostly strained pleasantries, held together by obligation and careful distance. She picked it up and stared at the screen. Mom, April's chest tightened. Ben passed by the hallway, noticed her stillness. Everything okay? She nodded too quickly. It's fine. But she didn't answer the call. She let it ring out, then placed the phone face down on the table. That evening, as the sun dipped low and washed the treetops in gold, April found herself alone in the kitchen. Lucas was in the living room working on his science project, and Ben had driven into town for a last-minute hardware run. She stood at the sink, rinsing apples for pie when the phone buzzed again. Same name, same weight in her chest. This time she picked it up. Hi, Mom. A beat of silence. Then, April. Her mother's voice was sharp, clipped as always. Not cold exactly, but precise in a way that had never left much room for softness. I heard what happened, she continued. Emily told me. Said you were living with some man in the mountains? April shut her eyes. It's not like that. Is it not? You run away from the mess you made and shack up with a stranger? April's knuckles whitened around the edge of the counter. He helped me when no one else would, when you didn't. There was a pause, then a sigh that was more accusation than regret. You embarrassed us. You didn't even call. I was left at the altar, Mom, publicly, pregnant. What was I supposed to say? Her mother's voice lowered. You should have come home. April swallowed hard. Home never felt like home. That's not fair. No, April said softly, but it's true. There was a beat of silence between them, full of everything neither had ever said. Then, your father wants you to call. He's been asking. April blinked. Her father had barely spoken to her since she told him about the pregnancy. Back then, he'd just stared at the floor, as if her words had dropped something heavy and irreparable between them. I'll think about it, she said, voice distant. Before her mother could respond, April added, Goodbye, Mom, and hung up. Her hands trembled as she turned off the water. She stood there for a long moment, eyes fixed on the faucet. Then a small voice behind her said, You okay? April turned. Lucas stood near the doorway, awkward but concerned, his brows drawn close together. She smiled, forcing steadiness into her voice. Yeah, buddy, just tired. He stepped forward and offered her something folded, one of his drawings. April opened it carefully. It was a sketch of her and the baby, both smiling, beneath a sky full of stars. At the bottom he'd written, in crooked letters, "Some people show up when you need them." Tears stung her eyes uninvited. "You're going to be a great big brother," she whispered. Lucas looked down, bashful. "Do you think she'll like me?" "She'll love you. More than the baby that guy left?" April knelt, belly heavy between them, and looked him straight in the eyes. "You're not after anything, Lucas. You're part of everything. That's different." He nodded, processing. Then unexpectedly, he leaned in and hugged her. Not tight, but long enough to say everything he couldn't quite form in words. When Ben returned, he found April on the porch again. This time, she wasn't holding tea or staring into space. She was humming, a tune he didn't recognize, something gentle and low, like a lullaby not quite born yet. He stepped beside her. "Everything okay?" She looked up at him, the porch light catching in her eyes. "My mom called. It stirred some things." He nodded. "Want to talk about it?" "Not yet." She leaned her shoulder against the post. "But thank you for asking." Ben crossed his arms, exhaling slowly. "Funny, isn't it? How people we love most can make us feel the smallest." She glanced sideways at him. "You felt that too?" "Every day for a year after Marianne died," he said. "People meant well, but their comfort felt like expectations I couldn't meet. Be strong. Move on. Smile for Lucas. I couldn't do any of it right." April's voice was soft. "Grief doesn't move on schedule." "No," he agreed. "But it moves. Eventually. When something or someone reminds you you're still alive." They stood there in the quiet, the air crisp and full of coming change. Above them, stars blinked to life between the clouds. April turned slightly toward him. "You've been that reminder. For me." Ben met her gaze, something tender flickering behind his eyes. "And you've been that for Lucas." They didn't touch, didn't kiss, not yet. But they stood closer than they had before. And somewhere between them a bond deepened, wordless, steady, real. The morning of the autumn festival dawned crisp and golden, with sunlight filtering through the thinning leaves like a promise. Pleasant Hills was alive with activity, children running with paper crowns, vendors setting up tables beneath canvas awnings, and the scent of cinnamon, wood smoke, and warm bread wafting through the air like memory. Ben was up early, loading an old folding chair and a small cooler into the truck. He moved with practiced ease, but his eyes kept drifting toward the house, toward the window where soft music floated into the morning stillness. April and Lucas had been practicing all week, an arrangement of "You Are My Sunshine" on piano and harmonica. It had started as a small thing, something playful, but Lucas, to everyone's surprise, had asked April if they could perform it at the festival's open stage. He wanted to play in front of people. Ben hadn't said much when he first heard the idea. He hadn't needed to. The look in his eyes, proud and stunned, had said it all. Inside, April sat beside Lucas on the bench, guiding his hands through the opening measures again. "Nice and easy," she murmured. "Let the melody carry itself." Lucas nodded, tongue between his teeth, eyes fixed on the keys. His shoulders were tense, but his fingers moved with purpose, hitting each note with growing certainty. April played alongside him, her own touch feather-light. When they reached the final chord, Lucas looked up. "Was that okay?" April smiled, brushing a hand through his hair. "It was better than okay." He gave a small grin, then stood and picked up his harmonica. "Do you think people will clap?" "I think they'll cheer." He looked down at the floor. "I used to be scared when people looked at me. But when we play, it's like I forget." April's voice softened. "That's what music does. It lets us be more than what hurt us." Lucas didn't say anything, but he nodded. That was enough. The town square had been transformed by noon. Colorful streamers strung between lampposts, hay bales arranged in loose circles, families milling about in denim jackets and flannel. Kids darted past with caramel apples, faces sticky with sugar. Local artisans displayed handmade soaps and wreaths woven from fallen leaves. Ben stood near the small stage, adjusting the bench they'd borrowed from the church. His flannel sleeves were rolled up, and he looked strangely at ease until April approached from behind. "How's he doing?" she asked. Ben exhaled. "Nervous, but focused. He's wearing that look you get when you're holding something delicate. April chuckled. He gets that from you. Ben turned toward her. The afternoon light caught in her hair, and the bump beneath her coat made her look luminous, grounded, beautiful. I'm glad you're here, he said, simple and sincere. April met his gaze. Me too. They didn't say more, they didn't need to. When Lucas stepped onto the stage, his small figure looked even smaller beneath the painted harvest banner. He clutched the harmonica in one hand and squinted against the crowd. April walked behind him, calm and steady, and sat at the piano like it was the most natural place in the world. The crowd hushed. Ben held his breath. April nodded to Lucas. He lifted the harmonica to his lips. The first notes were shaky but clear. April followed with the piano, slow and graceful, matching his tempo like a quiet current beneath his sound. Together they wove the old melody into something new, something tender, full of emotion and tiny cracks that made it more real. Lucas didn't falter. His eyes focused on the horizon, not the people, his fingers tight but sure. When they reached the last refrain, April slowed just enough for him to take a breath, and they ended together on a lingering chord that hung in the air like sunlight through trees. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the applause, loud and wholehearted, echoing through the square. Lucas blinked. He turned to April, stunned. She smiled. You did it! He grinned wide, the biggest smile Ben had seen in years, and threw his arms around her. Ben felt his throat tighten as the crowd stood, clapping not just for the performance, but for the boy who had once stopped smiling, and the woman who had quietly, patiently led him back to joy. After the set, they walked through the square as townsfolk came up to congratulate them. April received a dozen compliments, but she kept steering them toward Lucas. He's the real star, she said every time. Lucas beamed. He didn't hide behind her. He stood beside her. Ben watched all of it unfold, his chest full of something warm and complicated. Pride, certainly. Relief. Maybe something deeper, something he wasn't quite ready to name. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows between the booths, they found a quieter spot near the edge of the woods. A picnic table stood beside a narrow path leading into the trees, and April sat while Ben handed her a cup of cider. Lucas had gone off with a group of kids from school. His idea. April took a sip and sighed contentedly. This day felt like a movie. Ben smiled. You played the leading role. She shook her head. No, Lucas did. I was just the backdrop. No, Ben said gently. You're the reason he's up there at all. You gave him a piece of himself back. April looked at him, the way people do when they've heard something truer than they expected. Then a little quieter. You ever feel like you don't deserve something good after you've lost so much? Ben stared out at the trees. Every day. But I'm learning not everything has to be earned. Some things are just gifts. They sat in the golden hush, the woods whispering around them. April leaned her head against his shoulder, and Ben didn't move. He just let her rest there, as if that moment had always been waiting for them. In the distance, the faint sound of music still floated through the air. Clumsy fiddle strings, laughter, life. But out here beside the pines, a quieter harmony played. No audience, no stage. Just the boy who smiled again, the woman who taught him how, and the man who finally began to believe in second chances. The week after the autumn festival unfolded in slow, golden hours. The air carried that in-between feeling, part crisp promise of winter, part lingering warmth of fall. Leaves crunched beneath boots as Lucas chased the wind down the driveway, harmonica slung on a string around his neck like a badge of honor. Inside, April moved through the house with ease now, her steps slower as the weight of her pregnancy grew, but her spirit lighter. She was beginning to hum again without realizing it, little melodies drifting from room to room like echoes of hope. Ben noticed. He noticed a lot lately, the way she leaned against the kitchen counter when she was tired but didn't want to admit it. The way Lucas looked for her first when he got home from school. The way her laugh felt like a door opening where he thought all doors had closed. One afternoon, as he repaired a broken latch on the back porch, Ben caught her watching him through the screen door. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither looked away. Then April smiled, not flirtatious, not shy, just real. Ben smiled back, and that was when the past arrived. It came on 4 wheels, an expensive silver SUV crunching across the gravel like it didn't belong there. The engine purred like something out of a catalog. Ben stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag as the door opened. The man who stepped out wore polished shoes, a crisp white shirt, and the kind of confidence that didn't quite match the dirt road under his feet. "Is this the Callahan place?" he asked, glancing around like he was expecting more than what he saw. Ben narrowed his eyes. "Depends who's asking." The man offered a tight smile. "I'm looking for April Monroe." At that exact moment, the screen door creaked open behind Ben. April stepped out, her breath catching as soon as she saw him. "Cameron." He turned, face shifting instantly from businesslike to something softer. "April." Ben looked between them. The space around him felt tighter somehow. April descended the steps slowly. Her hands instinctively cradled her belly. She didn't say anything right away. Cameron stepped forward, voice low and rehearsed. "I know I don't deserve to be here. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I've been trying to find you. I needed to see you, to explain." April's face was unreadable. "There's nothing to explain." "Yes, there is," he said quickly. "I panicked. That day at the church, I saw you, beautiful and glowing and pregnant, and I just froze. I was scared, but I never stopped thinking about you." Ben felt the words like gravel in his shoes. Cameron took another step forward. "I made a mistake, a terrible one, but I want to make it right. I want to be there. For you, for the baby." April's voice was quieter but firmer. "You left me. You humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. You ran." "I know," he said, "but I've changed. I've got a better job now, a house. I can take care of you, of both of you. Just come back with me. We can start fresh." Silence fell over the yard like a drop in pressure before a storm. April looked down at her belly, then at Ben, who stood a few feet away. Still, silent but solid. She turned back to Cameron. "Do you know if it's a girl or a boy?" Cameron blinked. I assumed you'd tell me." "She's a girl," April said softly. "And she kicks when I listen to piano. She quiets when I sit on the porch and let the wind hit my face. She already knows what peace feels like." Cameron shifted uncomfortably. "I can give her stability, security." April met his eyes, steady now. "You couldn't give her a name, Cameron. You couldn't give her a single moment of courage when I needed it most. And now you want to buy your way back into her life? I want to be her father. Then you should have acted like one when it counted." The words were soft, but they landed with finality. Cameron's expression faltered. His voice dropped. "Is this about him?" He nodded toward Ben. "You're staying because of this guy?" Ben's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. April didn't look away. "I'm staying because of me, because I found a place where I'm safe, where I can breathe, and because this guy, as you call him, never once asked me to be anything other than exactly who I am." Cameron exhaled, his shoulders deflating. "So, that's it?" April's voice broke just a little. "That's it." He hesitated for another second. Then he turned, walked back to the SUV, and drove away, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of dust and old echoes. Ben didn't move. April stood with one hand on her belly, the other gripping the porch railing. "I'm sorry you had to see that," she said. Ben shook his head. "Don't be. You were strong. You said what needed to be said." She looked up at him then, eyes glistening but clear. "I didn't realize how much I needed to say it, until he was right in front of me again." Ben stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough for her to feel it. "You did right by her, by yourself." April let out a breath that sounded like release. "I didn't choose this life, Ben, but I'm starting to believe maybe it chose me. And maybe that's okay." He reached out then, gently, and placed a hand over hers on the curve of her belly. His touch was warm, steady. "She's lucky," he said quietly, "to have you." April looked up at him, something shifting between them, less guarded, more real. "And she's lucky," she whispered, "for the man who fixed more than a broken latch." Ben smiled, eyes full of something unspoken. And as the last of Cameron's dust settled behind the trees, the porch grew quiet again. Not the hollow kind of quiet that follows loss, but the full, tender kind that grows when wounds begin to close. The morning after Cameron's visit dawned quietly, as if the world itself was giving April space to think. Outside, fog curled through the trees like breath made visible, softening the edges of the woods and painting everything in shades of pearl gray. From the porch, the horizon disappeared into mist, and the silence was so deep April could hear her own heartbeat. She sat alone, a knitted blanket pulled across her lap, one hand resting gently on her belly. Ruby shifted beneath her skin, slow and strong, and April closed her eyes. She had made her decision, but the weight of it hadn't fully settled until now. Behind her, the screen door opened. Ben stepped out carrying 2 mugs of tea. He moved slowly, as if unsure whether he should interrupt the stillness. "Chamomile," he said simply, handing her a cup. "Thank you." He settled beside her on the porch swing, leaving just enough space to feel respectful. The chain creaked softly under their combined weight. "She's been quiet this morning," April murmured, her fingers moving in slow circles across her bump. "I think she's listening." Ben gave a faint smile. "She seems like a smart girl." They rocked for a moment in shared silence, the kind that had grown between them, not empty, not expectant, but companionable. Then April spoke. "I stayed up most of the night," she said. "Not crying, not angry, just thinking." Ben didn't reply. He sipped his tea and waited. "I've lived most of my life doing what I was supposed to do," she continued. "Be polite, be pleasing, be dependable, even when it hurt." She paused, looking out into the fog. "When Cameron came back, part of me, the old part, wanted to say yes, because it would have been easier, familiar, approved. But you didn't," Ben said gently. April shook her head. "No, I didn't, because I'm not that woman anymore." She turned to face him then, fully, her eyes luminous in the soft light. "This place, this home, you and Lucas, you've shown me what real safety feels like. Not comfort out of convenience, but peace that's earned, slowly, quietly, brick by brick." Ben held her gaze, his jaw tightening with emotion. "April, I'm not going back to that life," she said, "and I'm not waiting to be chosen again. I'm making a choice of my own." She reached for his hand, fingers curling around his. "I'm choosing to stay." Ben's breath caught, just slightly. The fog around them felt warmer somehow. "You don't have to rush anything," he said, voice low. "We're not in a hurry." April smiled softly. "I'm not rushing. I'm just recognizing something true." Then her expression shifted, still warm, but tinged with seriousness. "But I also need to ask you something, Ben." He nodded, bracing himself. "Are you holding on to Marianne so tightly," she asked gently, "that there won't be room for me?" The question hung in the air, bare and honest. Ben looked down at their hands, then out at the trees. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw but steady. "I loved her, deeply. Losing her broke something in me I thought couldn't be fixed." He paused, breathing in the morning air. "But then you showed up, not like a storm, not like lightning, more like sunlight after a long winter. And little by little, the ache started changing. Not disappearing, but softening, making space." He turned to her. "There's room, April. There's been room for a while now. I just needed to be brave enough to say it." April's eyes brimmed, and she nodded once, her grip on his hand tightening. Later that morning, Lucas found them both in the kitchen. He paused in the doorway, noticing how close they stood, how April's face looked calmer, like something had settled inside her. He clutched a folded piece of paper in his hand. "Can I show you something?" he asked. "Of course," April said, wiping her hands on a dish towel and crouching beside him. Lucas unfolded the paper and revealed a new drawing, one of the house, their front porch lit by lanterns, and 3 figures again. This time there was a fourth, a tiny baby in April's arms. He pointed to each. "That's me. That's Dad. That's you. And that's her." Ben leaned over his son's shoulder. "She's beautiful." Lucas nodded. "I think her middle name should be Hope." April looked at him, her throat tightening. "Why Hope?" Lucas shrugged, but his answer was simple. "Because that's what she brought." April pulled him into a gentle hug, careful of her belly. "Thank you, sweetheart." Ben ruffled his son's hair. You're growing up, you know that? Lucas grinned. I've had a good teacher. That evening after dinner, in a slow walk beneath the stars, April sat down at the piano. She'd been avoiding it since Cameron's visit, not because she couldn't play, but because music had always been where her truth lived, and she hadn't been ready to feel that deeply. But now as the fire crackled softly nearby, and Lucas lay curled up with a book, April placed her fingers on the keys. She began to play something new. It started simply. 3 notes, gentle and questioning. Then a chord, fuller, rounder, like an answer. The melody grew, rich and warm, weaving between hesitation and hope, echoing the shape of a heart learning how to beat again. Ben watched from the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, a smile slowly stretching across his face. When she finished, Lucas clapped softly, his eyes wide. Was that a real song? April looked up, blinking. It is now. Ben stepped forward. What's it called? April met his gaze, and her voice was barely a whisper. The choice. The first snow came early that year. It wasn't heavy, just a quiet dusting that painted the rooftops white and softened the outlines of the trees. It covered the porch steps in a fragile shimmer and left the air tasting like something new. The firewood crackled louder that morning, and Lucas pressed his nose to the window like he was seeing magic for the first time. April stood behind him, a hand on her belly, watching him watch the world. Snow, Lucas whispered, as if saying it too loudly would break the spell. April smiled. It suits this place, like it's wrapping everything in a blanket. Ben came in from the back door, shaking frost from his coat. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes bright. Roads are quiet. I think the towns are still sleeping. He leaned in to kiss April's cheek, just a brief brush, but one that lingered in the warm hush of the room. Lucas turned toward them, thoughtful. Then, without looking up, he said, Can we put up the Christmas lights today? Ben raised a brow. It's not even Thanksgiving. Lucas shrugged. Feels like it. Ben ruffled his hair. That's the best reason I've heard yet. That afternoon, the 3 of them bundled in scarves and gloves, untangled a decade's worth of knotted lights from dusty boxes in the shed. April mostly supervised from the porch rocker, her belly now heavy enough to slow her steps, but her laughter warm and easy. Ben balanced on a ladder, swearing gently under his breath as he fought with a stubborn strand, while Lucas darted across the yard, testing outlets and checking bulbs. You're doing great, boss, April called, grinning. Lucas gave her a thumbs up, cheeks rosy with cold and pride. Halfway through stringing the lights, a car pulled into the drive, a familiar tan sedan from school. Mrs. Harrington, Lucas's teacher, stepped out with a clipboard tucked beneath her arm and a kind, curious smile. Sorry to drop in unannounced, she said to Ben, but I thought I'd bring by Lucas's progress report and check in. We haven't had a parent meeting this quarter. April stood carefully and walked down to greet her. Hi, I'm April. Mrs. Harrington blinked, then smiled wider. Oh, yes, I've heard about you. Lucas mentioned you helped him with his music project. That performance at the fall festival? Still the talk of the school? April glanced toward Ben and Lucas, who were now half listening from a few feet away. He's a natural. Mrs. Harrington lowered her voice gently. He's also changed. For the better. More open, more vocal. He volunteers in class now, talks to the other kids. It's like something inside him has started to heal. April's eyes stung unexpectedly. Mrs. Harrington continued, I wanted to share something, actually. Last week, we asked the kids to write short stories about their heroes. She pulled a folded paper from the clipboard and handed it to April. April hesitated, then opened it. My Hero by Lucas Callahan. My hero doesn't wear a cape. She plays piano and drinks tea and helps me remember how to smile. She talks to my baby sister like she's already here. And when she sits by me, it feels like the world is not so scary anymore. My hero is April, and I hope she stays forever. April brought her hand to her mouth. Ben stepped closer, sensing the shift, and read over her shoulder. His arm moved instinctively around her back. Lucas watched from a few steps away, suddenly looking nervous. Was it okay? April turned to him, tears glinting in her lashes. Sweetheart, it was perfect. Lucas looked down, kicking at the snow-dusted grass. I didn't want to make anyone sad. You didn't, she said, kneeling slowly until they were eye level. You gave me a gift I'll never forget. Lucas leaned in and wrapped his arms around her. Not shy, not brief. A full, warm embrace. Ben watched them, eyes misted, heart full. That evening, the lights finally blinked to life, casting a soft, colorful glow across the porch railings and the old pine tree in the front yard. The three of them stood back to admire their work, steam rising from their mugs as the first real flakes began to fall. April leaned into Ben's side, her head on his shoulder. I still remember the first day I saw this house, she whispered. It looked like something from another life, somewhere I didn't belong. And now? He asked. She smiled. Now it looks like where I was always meant to end up. Ben's arm tightened around her. Lucas was drawing again that night, curled up on the couch, humming faintly to himself. April played a gentle tune on the piano, her fingers coaxing notes like firelight into the room. And when she stopped, Lucas looked up and said, I want to write a song for her, for Ruby. April's breath caught. You do? He nodded. A lullaby, for when she can't sleep. Ben sat down beside him. Want some help? Lucas hesitated, then smiled. Maybe just a little. And in that quiet evening, a boy who once lived in silence began composing a song of comfort for a sister he hadn't even met yet, but already loved more than words. The rain returned in the early hours of the morning, soft at first like a whisper against the roof, then steadier, fuller, like the rhythm of an old lullaby. It filled the quiet house with a gentle hum, the kind of sound that wrapped around you and held you still. Ben woke first, as he always did, but this time he didn't rise immediately. He lay in the quiet, listening. April's breathing was slow beside him, her hand resting on the round curve of her belly beneath the blankets. He turned his head slightly to watch her, his heart tightening with a kind of tenderness that never seemed to dull. How had this happened? How had a woman in a rain-soaked wedding dress, sitting alone at a bus stop, become the center of his home, his son's healing, his future? And yet nothing felt rushed. Every step with her had been earned, softly, patiently. Love, he'd come to learn, didn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it slipped in quietly through the cracks of your broken places, lighting one small room at a time. By midday, the rain still hadn't let up. Lucas sat on the floor near the fireplace, pencil in hand, scribbling down the last few notes of the lullaby he'd been composing all week. The song had grown into something beautiful, halting and simple, but honest. April had helped him with the chords, gently correcting his rhythm, guiding his fingers. Ben had offered quiet nods of encouragement, stepping back when the moment belonged to them alone. Now, as the fire crackled and shadows danced on the walls, April leaned against the armrest of the couch, smiling faintly as she listened. Lucas played through the opening again, then looked up, a little hesitant. Do you think she'll like it? April reached over, resting her hand on his. She'll love it, and she'll know it came from her big brother's heart. Lucas glanced at Ben. Can we record it? So she can listen to it even when I'm not here? Ben nodded. We'll find a way. The house felt full, not just of sound, but of love, of becoming. That evening, April stood by the window and watched the storm. The sky outside was dark slate, the trees swaying under the weight of wind. Rain streamed down the glass in rivulets, blurring the lights of the porch. She wrapped one of Ben's old flannel shirts around herself, her arms folded beneath her belly. Ruby was moving more today, restless inside her, almost like she could feel something shifting. Ben came up behind her, slipping his arms around her gently. Everything okay? He asked. April leaned into him. I think she's coming soon. He stilled. Tonight? April shook her head. Not yet, but soon. Ben kissed her temple. We'll be ready. They stood there together for a moment, swaying slightly to the sound of the rain, like they were dancing to music only they could hear. April closed her eyes. You remember the night we met? She asked softly. How could I forget? Ben murmured. You sitting on that bench like something out of a dream, and me completely unsure if you were real or a figment of a tired man's imagination. April laughed quietly. I was a mess. Wet, swollen, abandoned. Ben turned her gently to face him. You were brave, and you were mine long before I knew what to call it." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I found you in the rain." He kissed her then, soft and steady, like a promise sealed not with grand gestures, but with quiet knowing. Later that night, as the storm rolled deeper across the hills, April couldn't sleep. The baby was restless, or maybe it was her heart. She slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the piano. The room was dim, lit only by the fire's flicker. Lucas's sheet music was still open on the stand, dotted with pencil notes and eraser smudges. April sat and let her fingers fall into familiar shapes. She played the melody Lucas had written, adding a soft left hand beneath it, a lullaby within a lullaby. And as the song grew, her own tears fell, not out of sadness but of wonder. This wasn't the life she had imagined. It was better, less polished, more real, and entirely hers. Ben appeared in the doorway, drawn by the music. He didn't speak, just stood and listened. When she finished, she turned and met his eyes. "I want to name her Ruby Grace," she said. Ben smiled, slow and full. "It's perfect." "She's our Grace," April whispered. "After everything we lost, after everything we found." Ben crossed the room, knelt beside her, and placed his hand on her belly. "She was always meant for here," he said. "For this home, for this love." April covered his hand with hers, anchoring the moment, and outside the rain fell on, steady, cleansing, true. The world was still when Ruby Grace Callahan arrived. It was just after dawn, the sky barely lit with the first wash of pale gold. Outside, the last snow of the season lay soft and silent over the trees, blanketing the hills in a kind of hush that felt almost sacred. The storm from the night before had passed, and in its place was a deep, steady calm, as if nature itself had paused to bear witness. April's cries had broken that quiet sometime in the early hours, but she never sounded afraid. Her pain was raw and honest, but so was her strength. Ben had stayed by her side through every breath, every contraction, holding her hand, whispering reassurances, his forehead pressed to hers when her body shook from exhaustion. And when the moment finally came, when the room filled with that first sharp cry, Ben felt something crack open in his chest. Not break, just open. He had thought he'd already known love, but this was different. This was beginning. Hours later, the little cabin was filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Lucas tiptoed into the bedroom, eyes wide, holding a stuffed bear in one hand. Ben knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You ready to meet her?" he asked. Lucas nodded, almost solemn. April lay propped up in bed, her face pale but glowing. The baby nestled against her chest. The newborn's skin was soft and pink, her eyes blinking lazily beneath a knit cap someone in town had made months ago, back when she was still just a name on a due date. When Lucas reached the bed, April turned to him, her voice quiet. "Would you like to hold her?" Lucas hesitated. "Can I?" Ben smiled. "She's been waiting for you." April carefully guided his hands and Lucas sat beside her, cradling his sister with the kind of gentleness only a child with a scarred heart could know. He stared at her face for a long time. "She's so small," he whispered. April brushed a hand through his hair. "She won't be for long." Lucas leaned in slightly, resting his cheek near hers. "Hi, Ruby," he murmured. "I wrote you a song. We'll play it later." April's throat tightened. Ben reached across the bed and squeezed her hand. It wasn't a loud moment, but it was holy. The next week passed in a blur of soft blankets, whispered lullabies, and long hours where the only rhythm that mattered was the rise and fall of Ruby's breathing. Neighbors dropped off pies, casseroles, and hand-me-downs. A few of Ben's old friends stopped by to check in. One even brought over a handmade wooden cradle, sanded smooth and carved with little pine trees along the side. Lucas took it upon himself to be Ruby's unofficial protector. He hovered nearby during every diaper change, carried her blankets around like precious cargo, and proudly announced to anyone who'd listen, "She already knows my voice." April recovered slowly but gracefully. Her strength returned like spring thaw, one soft inch at a time. She spent her mornings at the piano again, Ruby in a wrap against her chest, playing the lullabies they had written together, letting the music settle over the baby like a second skin. Ben would sit on the porch some evenings watching through the window, and every time he saw her there, his son by her side, the baby curled beneath her chin, he felt something click into place that he didn't know had been missing. Not just love, belonging. One Sunday afternoon, beneath a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at, Ben laid out a picnic on the patch of grass behind the house. It wasn't fancy, just sandwiches, apples, and a thermos of lemonade, but it felt like celebration. April sat with Ruby nestled in her lap, her eyes closed as she hummed. Lucas lay on his stomach with a book open beside him, a leaf tucked behind his ear like a bookmark. Ben watched them for a moment before reaching into his coat pocket. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, turning to April. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Hmm?" He took a deep breath and held out a small velvet box. Not flashy, not scripted, just simple and true. April blinked. "I don't need you to say yes right away," he said. "You've already given me more than I thought I'd ever have again. But I want to spend every morning making tea for you, every evening tucking Ruby in with you, and every messy, beautiful day building this life with you, as your partner, as your husband." April opened the box. Inside was a ring made from polished wood and a single small diamond set in silver. Her voice trembled. "Ben Callahan, are you proposing with a ring made from a tree?" He smiled. "From the pine that fell behind the house last spring. I carved it myself. Lucas helped sand it." Lucas sat up. "It was my idea to make it round." April laughed, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Then how could I possibly say no?" She held out her hand, and Ben slipped the ring on her finger, his own eyes glistening. Ruby stirred in her lap, letting out a tiny sigh, and just like that, it was done. No ceremony, no altar, just earth and sky and love so rooted it no longer needed fanfare. That night, as the last light disappeared behind the hills, April sat at the piano with Ruby in her arms, Lucas beside her, and Ben leaning in the doorway. She began to play the song Lucas had written, the one that had started as a gift and become a legacy. "Found You in the Rain." The melody floated through the house, touching every beam, every memory, every scar. Outside, the wind stirred gently through the trees. The world, in its quiet way, turned forward. And in a cabin tucked deep in the hills of Oregon, a new kind of family played on, unpolished, unexpected, and absolutely whole. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from? And how did this story make you feel? If it touched your heart, even just a little, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you more stories that speak to the quiet corners of the soul. Thank you truly for spending your time with us today. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and keep believing in the power of love.